patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, civility, the values that define America. Fascinating stories and talks from America-loving patriots dedicated to preserving freedom, opportunity, and justice. Welcome to the Friends and Fellow Citizens podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 110th episode of Friends and Fellow Citizens. I'm your host, Sherman Talosky. Welcome to the program. Thank you all so much for joining me as we wrap up the 2022 season, really, of Friends and Fellow Citizens. This will be the final interview episode of the year. I'm really happy that you're joining us today. We got a very special episode, another guest coming on, but also just a little bit of fun. I mean, it is the holiday season. I hope you all had a fantastic Thanksgiving, and you're looking forward to the winter holidays coming up later this month and early into next year, 2023. As always, make sure to subscribe to the show if you haven't already. Subscribe to our email list. Check out some unique merchandise. We have a couple of different mugs for you to purchase for yourself or for your Christmas gifts for your family and friends. I mean, this is just a wonderful opportunity to support the program, so I hope you will check out that information on our website at shermantalosky.com. Links down in the show notes below. So this episode is a bit of a hybrid version. So we're going to be doing an interview for the first half, and then in the second half, we will be doing some holiday trivia, and just to really relax and do something really different, which is what we're all about here on the Friends and Fellow Citizens, trying out new things. And we did holiday trivia last year, and it was a really, really popular episode. So I'm really hoping that you all will enjoy this one here. And without further ado, let's introduce our guest today. A native of Katy, Texas, Maura Spence-Carroll serves in the Army Reserve and is a communications student in Colorado. She served as Miss Colorado 2021 and is a former intelligence analyst with the 2nd Battalion, 23rd Infantry Regiment, 1st Brigade Combat Team of the 4th Infantry Division, based in Fort Carson near Colorado Springs. She joined the Army in 2018 after a semester of college when she realized the cost and accumulation of debt was just not worth the pursuit of a degree. As Miss Colorado, one of her passion projects is addressing mental health within the military and veteran community and erasing the stigma attached to it. Growing up, she lived with ADHD, and in 2020, she reached out for help and was officially diagnosed with ADHD after initially struggling in the Army. She's been very active in these projects even after her time in Miss Colorado, and she plans to attend law school and hopes to become a civil rights attorney for the ACLU. And now I'd like to welcome our guest, Maura Spence-Carroll. Maura, thank you so much for coming on to Friends and Fellow Citizens today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for the conversation and trivia we're going to be getting into.
Oh, it's so wonderful for you to be on the program, and I know you got a lot going on with school, and certainly the last probably couple of years has been a bit of a whirlwind for you as you kind of adjusted back to school. I can certainly say that as someone who's working on a doctoral degree. I welcome anyone to academia at this time, sometimes. but I want to first obviously get into a bit more about yourself, and in particular, really about your interest in a military career. Let's just start with that. So how did you get into the military, and really kind of what's been the journey like over the last few years for you?
Absolutely. So I joined the military, the U.S. Army, when I was 18 years old. And part of the reason I chose the Army, everyone always asks, is because I was not going to do water. So that immediately cut out the Navy, the Marines, and the Coast Guard. And my grandfather was in the Air Force, so you would think that's the obvious choice. And I said, no, I need to be a little bit of a rebel. I'm going to go Army. And my mom was a little annoyed I didn't go Air Force at first. And she did remind me that the Navy has better uniforms. But thankfully, since then, I've made her proud. So I am an all-source intel analyst. I was stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, starting in 2019. I was there for 2.5 years, including during my year of service as Miss Colorado 2021. And in the last few months, I've transitioned into my reserves unit. So now I do my 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. And I actually have some training coming up in January that I'm really excited about.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, you go through all these different stages in your life, and you learn lessons from each one. So let's go a bit into kind of your journey as Miss Colorado. My understanding is that you're the first active duty member to serve as Miss Colorado. Tell us about what that journey was like, and just some of the highlights from your time as Miss Colorado.
So that journey is a little bit of an unexpected one. And part of the reason for that is I started competing in the Miss America organization when I was 13 years old. So I was an unlikely person to join the Army at all because I was a quote unquote pageant girl. And it was the Miss America organization that gave me a love of service and taught me not only what I wanted to do with my own life, but the ways in which I wanted to impact other people through my work, through my community service, through my future career. And I've always been someone that's pretty focused. So at 10 years old, I knew I wanted to be an attorney. By 12, I knew I wanted to go to Miss America one day, and I knew I wanted to go to the 100th anniversary. I took a break from competing for a couple of years when I was in my late teens. And then 2 weeks before I shipped out for basic training, I competed in a local competition, not expecting to win because it was my first ever time competing as a Miss. Very different from the teen organization. And I won a title. And all of a sudden I was shipping off to basic, and I was in AIT learning how to become an intel analyst and how to be a soldier in general, on top of just figuring out life at 18, because that is very difficult. And then I was competing for Miss Texas because I grew up in Texas beforehand. After that year, I competed. I didn't place, but I did win overall college interview, which I was very proud of, and I still am. And I was hoping and praying that I would get stationed in Colorado. Because my mom and I had discussed, well, if I get stationed here, I could compete here. And I said, no, the only state that I would want to compete in is Colorado or Texas. And I can't compete in Texas if I'm living in another state because that commute would be awful. So thankfully, I got stationed here in Colorado. And from there, I kept thinking about whether I wanted to return because I knew that if I competed, I wanted to put all of my hard work, effort, anything that I could into it. I didn't want to just kind of show up and compete for the sake of competing. And it was after the COVID year when Miss America kind of shut down for a year. They didn't have any state competitions. They didn't have a national competition, that I really made the decision to compete for Miss Colorado. And from there, I had to talk to my leadership and I had to explain what the Miss America organization is and why I wanted to compete at Miss America, and also why it would be beneficial for both sides, for both the Miss America organization and the U.S. Army, for my unit to allow me to compete. And I think that a large part of it was that they already knew I was a good soldier. I was very proud of the work that I did. I loved working hard. I loved my unit. And I had a really stellar set of leadership at pretty much every single level in my organization. So I got very lucky. And I also want to talk about military and veteran suicide prevention. I have a strong connection to mental and behavioral health services in the military. I received behavioral health services while I was active duty, and I still receive services now as a civilian half the time. And I wanted to raise awareness about the quality of life improvements that come not only from talking openly about your personal struggles or the ability to overcome any setbacks, but also that come from telling your leadership and being able to get the extra help. And most importantly, I wanted to show all the other service members that I was serving alongside, whether that was right there in my unit at Fort Carson, Colorado, or all the way across the world, that we can have a greater impact by speaking up than we usually anticipate. I was just an E4. I was a specialist. Well, I was a specialist promotable. And I was invited to the Pentagon to speak with the Sergeant Major of the Army and the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army to discuss what it is like for soldiers to be living in the barracks like I was, and to be in a unit like I was, and to have to keep up with all of those demands and the ways that we can help them make that mental adjustment in order to better serve our military. Because the fact is, you can be as physically strong as you want, but if your mental health is not also being prioritized, you're holding yourself back. And as a force, if we want to be a competent, ready, resilient military, that includes talking about mental health services and taking on this aspect of holistic health that takes into account not only physical strength, but mental endurance, resilience, and the ability to ask for help when you need it.
It's such a wonderful story, and I like how you connected all of those. And I'm sure the commute might have been faster if you could fly an F-16 if you joined the Air Force, going from Colorado to Texas, obviously.
If only.
I gotta say that must have been quite an interesting pitch when you spoke to your leaders, because maybe one moment they were talking about national security strategy, and then another moment they had to kind of switch gears, if you know what I mean, a little bit. Unless there is some kind of national security initiative in the Miss America organization that I don't know about. In that case, I'd be very curious to know.
I don't know about it either, so they might be hiding something from us.
I think it's classified. It's the only justification and
That must be
explanation.
it. We don't have the need to know. That's why.
Let's go a bit into obviously some of your platform now, and I think we should maybe start with some of the issues that I think you think really are coming back, because I do think one of the reasons why I reached out to you more is because I do think it's such a critical issue, and I'm really glad that we've had a few veterans on our podcast already over the last 2+ years of Friends and Fellow Citizens, and it's just always great to hear some of those stories and the way that they're able to reach out and really care about this issue, not just as veterans, but I think as American citizens too. So what are some of the big issues that you found? I mean, you mentioned kind of a couple big ones already. But what sort of other issues do you think are really impacting, yourself, or not just yourself maybe, but there's just people and the veterans who are still out there and hoping that they can get some kind of solution to be better prepared and more resilient?
Well, like I said, there's a lot of aspects that impact mental health that people don't think about. I mean, if you look at the risk factors, if we're talking specifically about suicide, the risk factors include financial difficulties, instability in day-to-day life, housing insecurity, and those are things that we deal with a lot in the military that maybe people don't address. It is very stressful to have a family member who is active duty or even in the reserves and National Guard in the military, because there is an aspect of, I don't 100% know that the way we are living our life today is how it's going to be a month from now. And I think that's even more prevalent in the 21st century. As we've seen, there is a pretty constant rotation of deployments happening, even when it's not to an active combat zone. If it's going somewhere like Korea or Germany, as pulling people away from their families. And that's scary because that also impacts the family members. That impacts the children of service members who have moved every 3 or 4 years and who don't have any sense of like, oh, I know that I'm always going to be here with my best friends. If we talk about just the housing issue, when you're a soldier in the barracks, you thankfully have a sense of stability in that, but there just is not enough money and maintenance to go around. So it's not like we were living lavish. It's cinder block walls and small windows, and sometimes the heating goes out, and we have to keep up with that as quickly as we can. But even when you get outside of the barracks, if you're married or if you're an officer, if we're talking about the housing issues that we have in Colorado Springs alone, we have multiple bases here. So we're not going to count the Air Force Academy because they have to stay in the dorms. But we have Cheyenne Mountain Base. We have Fort Carson, which is a major military base. We have Peterson, and there's one more. I can't remember the name of it. You can cut that out. But all of those service members have no choice but to live in Colorado Springs. It's not an option like other jobs where you can work out, like let's work remote or maybe don't relocate me. You get stationed here, you get stationed here. And as more people in general just move to the area, there is a housing shortage. And as a result, there are people who are either needing to figure out how they're going to afford rent. The average rent in Colorado Springs right now, I think, is $1,563 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Not too bad, but a little bit stressful when you're utilizing BAH, we're keeping things on a military budget. And on top of that, you have to deal with the stress of, okay, if I live somewhere that's a little bit more affordable and has availability, I'm 45 minutes away from work and I have to be there at 5:30 in the morning, which means I am waking my spouse and my kids and my dogs and my cats up at 4 o'clock in the morning to get ready for work and go out. There are a lot of different aspects as well when it comes to community. I loved living in the barracks because I was close with the people that were in my unit. So I could go to another friend's room, we could hang out, we could watch Marble Olympics on YouTube and spend time together. But there is a real isolation that happens because, especially in the case of lower enlisted, or junior enlisted, soldiers such as I was in the barracks, it's scary. You're 19, 20 years old, you just decided to join the military, you don't have any other family with you in the area, and now you are thrown into an environment that you are still getting used to and expected not only to survive but thrive. And there are a lot of expectations that are placed on soldiers. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have high standards for our soldiers, but it is important to recognize the fact that the mental stress of that, of all the background noise of, I don't know if I'm going to get deployed in the next year or two, on top of, I feel like I don't make enough money, I hate my barracks, my leadership is mean to me. Like, those are real valid concerns. And while we have other resources that are available to soldiers to help them when they're going through relationship troubles or financial difficulties or a hard phase of life, it doesn't change the fact that we need to be more proactive in order to help those soldiers. And that is at any level. And the greatest barrier that I've found, and a lot of it was through reading comments on different articles that were written about me during my year, was that people don't want to change. They say, well, this worked for me in the 90s. The Army is getting soft. And at first, when I was getting hate mail, I was so offended. I was so upset because I was like, I'm trying to do a good thing. I want to help people, and they won't let me help them. And it was with time and research and speaking to people and maturity and reading the hate comments, which I know they tell you to never do, but it gave, some good perspective on the other side. I don't think that a lot of people realize that just because we are a more understanding Army doesn't mean we're less lethal or we're less ready or we are less mission capable. In fact, as I was saying before, that mental fortitude and resilience increases your capabilities, because instead of thinking about all that background noise, you can focus on the mission at hand. And no matter what that is, whether you're a Chinook mechanic, whether you're an infantryman, whether you're an intel analyst like I am, it's important for us to keep the task at hand directly in front of us, because it can mean the difference between a mission success or lives lost.
I really like this conversation about resilience. I kind of want to and ask you about that a bit more, about really this. You mentioned the generational differences. On the one hand, we want to build resilience, right? Toughness. And obviously that kind of comes with, the dealing with difficult circumstances. On the other hand, we also want to, in a way, prepare people for resilience, right? By not making it more difficult. How do we go about this sort of divide and really striking some level of, maybe not necessarily balance, because I think it sounds so rosy, it's like, oh, everything's balanced, so it's like, I don't think anything in life is really that balanced, generally speaking. But how do we kind of be able to reconcile those kind of two different elements of developing resiliency, in your opinion?
It's gonna be slightly off topic, but the thing that I noticed the most is that when I talk specifically about therapy and about my experience in therapy, I would get feedback that was basically along the lines of, I don't need to pay someone to listen to my problems because that is what friends are for. That's what journaling is for. That's what, whatever you have it. And I think that there's this misconception that mental health services is just you talking about your problems and then throwing pills at you, or, just letting you talk it out until you fix it on your own. And that's not the case. I know for myself, because I have ADHD, I have to develop coping mechanisms. And so it is an active strategy for me to, one, rethink the way that I interpret situations and the way that I approach challenges. And I carry that with me. And it's not just me going like, this is the problem that I have this week, and then next week I have a different problem. It's me going to my mental health care provider and saying, this is a problem that I'm having. And I talk about it, and I talk about it. And she goes, have you tried this? And I go, that actually could help. Yeah, I think so. And I try the strategy when another challenge comes up, and all of a sudden I'm able to get through it more easily. It's not as catastrophic. It's not as damaging. It's not as mentally draining as it would have been a week or a month or a year ago, because I'm constantly developing these strategies, these mechanisms through which I can better react in the future. And that applies to resiliency as well. I'm not just talking about, the regular, I call them brain worms, when, your brain just kind of goes haywire and says the things that we shouldn't be saying to ourselves. But that happens in terms of when you have a last minute deadline that you're given. Instead of panicking and going, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to do this. It's the resiliency to say, I'm going to get as much done as I can and as good a job as I can. And if I don't get it done, or if it's not perfect, it's not the end of the world. At least it got done. And, that's just one example. But I think that it's just going to take a lot of education. And it is hard, because I'm not saying that like, oh, I'm a completely accepting, I listen to everyone else's ideas person. I try to, but everyone has bias. And it is very hard to work past that internal bias and accept what someone else is saying when it opposes a view that you have. You've heard of growth mindset versus a fixed mindset?
Heard of it, yes.
Yep. I feel like the best strategy for not just educating between generations, but across careers, across cultures, is at the baseline level, teaching people how to have a growth mindset and how to accept information. You don't have to believe it, but at least how to compartmentalize and say, this is a belief that is limiting me, and I am being stubborn just for the sake of being stubborn, versus this is something that can help me in the future, or I learned something new today, whatever have you. You can take in different viewpoints, different pieces of information, whether that's, I don't understand why we need therapy, we didn't have it back in my day, or any other situation that we have. I think that we are having a very difficult time as a country listening. And so one of the biggest things that we can teach each other, that we can teach soldiers and doctors and paramedics and, what have you, whatever it is how to listen to each other and how to understand that your own circumstances are not the reality for every single person involved.
The listening element, I think, is such a key thing. And I'm really glad you brought it up, because this, I think, really goes into this whole element of human society and kind of the success of how people interact, and not to mention social networks and how people are interacting or not interacting. Certainly, we want to have conversations about social networks and how that fits into play. I guess kind of related to that, the social network, if you like, or just of the listening element. As you probably know, one of the big issues is suicide prevention among veterans, and I couldn't help but the other day think about how just in about a few months time, we're marking 20 years since the invasion of Iraq. Which still, maybe I'm just feeling a little older today, but I remember when I was a young kid learning about the invasion of Iraq, and knowing some of the basic circumstances that we got to, and 20 years down the line, I think it's still an issue. I mean, it's been an issue for a while, but I know that while as controversial as that decision later became, but I think a lot of times we we don't understand the people who are actually on the ground. We've kind of constantly have to remind ourselves as a country about the importance of veterans and kind of their health when they come back, And so, Maura, my question to you is really, kind of based on your platform and kind of some of the things that you've seen. What are some things that you've seen over the last few years about these efforts to prevent soldier suicide and some of the major challenges that we still have up ahead?
One of the greatest challenges that I encountered, mainly with civilian supporters who have the best of intentions, is the grouping of all veterans into a monolith. When my time in the U.S. Army is done, I'm volunteering for deployments. I'm hoping I get one, but my deployment experience as an intel analyst in 2023, 24, 25, 26 is going to be vastly different from the deployment experience of an infantryman in 2003 and 2004. And that approach of acknowledging that veterans are not a monolith of veterans, but that we're individuals. We're real people. We're normal people. We, put our shoes on one foot at a time, and that we have individual needs. And it was always a little bit difficult when I would, again, talk to people who had such good intentions. And I would tell them, honestly, the best way to help a junior enlisted soldier or a lieutenant who just got stationed at their first unit and has never, is now expected to be a leader for the first time at 23, 24 years old, is to give them a sense of community. And it's hard. It is hard to tell people, like, you need to connect with each other, because that's not something that you can necessarily force. But that sense of community, that human connection, that recognition of our own humanity is one of the greatest prevention measures of suicide that I found, is simply recognizing everyone's individuality.
And do you think that kind of connects with this other? It's not necessarily a solution. I think I just think it's a huge component of our society, which is this idea of maintaining some kind of family or family-oriented structure. And I think there's maybe some kind of way you can complement, mental health services, but also just like the societal and cultural element. What do you think about some of those ideas of not only putting together a community, which could be a community in a neighborhood or in a city or town, what have you, but also kind of reemphasizing maybe some element of reconnecting family or just anything that could breed some element of faith back in the families of veterans who we lost already.
I'm a big believer in the concept of found family. So I have my family that's in Texas right now. And then I also have who I consider to be my family in Denver. I have Darla and Todd Bergeron and the entire Bergeron clan, who have given me here a warm home that I can go to on weekends, or have given me that sense of belonging and community. And I've also found it with the friendships that I have here, with other soldiers in my unit, with people I served with in basic, while we were in training together, that we still speak with each other. And that is actually how I became a godmother, was that one of my friends from basic asked me to be the godmother of her daughter. And I think it's, again, important to acknowledge what it means to be close with people who have shared life experience. They don't necessarily have to be related by blood, but if you have that group of people around you that are willing to listen, and that you're willing to listen to, and that you can connect with, and that you can simply spend time with, that is monumental. And I think the biggest aspect, again, of connecting people to, whether it's blood family or found families or creating their own, is I keep going back to telling people to listen to each other, but we can learn so much from deciding to listen to people that we typically wouldn't. there's a great phrase in one of my favorite classes that I'm taking this semester that my professor says all the time. There's one rule in our class, and it's seek first to understand, then you may speak, basically. And the understanding is that we have to not just listen to what someone is saying coming out of their mouth, the words. We have to attempt to understand the meaning and understand how they came to that conclusion, their life experiences that led them there. And I think that if we take that into consideration, that sense of listening to each other, trying to first to understand, and then we can talk, then we can share our own side, would allow us to connect with more people and have that found family and embrace the fact that we are more similar as human beings, as Americans, as veterans, as civilians, than we are dissimilar.
Oh, I wish politicians in DC could listen to that, because I can imagine that in the halls of the Rayburn House Office Building or the Dirksen Senate Office Building.
Oh my gosh, we can only hope.
We'll have to get permission from Capitol Police or the architect of the Capitol to be able to broadcast that. But anyhow,
I'll ask them nicely.
Yes, if you do it nicely, right? If you do it nicely with Maura Spence-Carroll, you can do a lot of things.
Yeah. I'll just give them a big old smile and be like, "Hi."
That's your job. I get to be behind the scenes and make it happen.
Okay, sounds like a plan.
Kind of related to what you just said, obviously, as when you were doing basic training in Fort Carson, I'm sure you've learned a lot from your leaders, from your commanders, and this is kind of just a general thing, but kind of maybe ties a little bit of political stuff. But what do you think are some of the things that I think our leaders in general should be doing to encourage more listening? And I think, broadly speaking, you can touch upon, just the political nature of American politics. You can talk about maybe just any personal experiences, but what sort of things do you think our leaders should be listening to in order to not only be better listeners, but to encourage the people they're talking to listen better?
I think that media literacy needs to be a bigger priority than I believe it is now. It's social media, like we were talking about earlier. Technology has been a wonderful tool because it connects people with all kinds of ideas from all sorts of backgrounds. And the unfortunate thing is that because a lot of people were never educated on how to check sources, how to validate, how to have some critical thinking in the way that they consume their media, there's a tendency to go, I saw it, and so it must be true because I think that it looks accurate. And that is not true. There are going to be times that there's information put out there that isn't accurate and that is utilized to control the narrative or to shift the narrative in a certain direction. And I constantly say that one of the greatest tragedies in American politics, not to get too political, is that we only have a two-party system. And so we've created this unnecessary binary when throughout the country, you're going to find a lot of people who don't perfectly fit within one side or the other. And because we have created this binary system, we have moved away from critically thinking, okay, what are the policies of this person who I am going to democratically elect to be my representative, as is the case in a representative democracy? What policies do they have? How do they align with my beliefs? What is my vision for this country? And how will this person progress our country to the point that I want it to be? And on the flip side, we also have politicians who I think don't listen. They have it in their head, like, this is what I want. And I think there has been a disconnect between the purpose of being an elected official, which is to represent the voice of the people who have elected you. And instead we treat politicians more and more as celebrities. And they're not celebrities. They are employed by the people of the country. I'm a constituent. And so my elected leaders, if I have an issue that I am very passionate about and I get other constituents in my region to write a letter or to discuss that with my representative or my senator or my governor, there's an obligation to at least listen and hear what we are saying, what we mean by it, and consider that course of action.
Yeah, it seems like people really do want to be heard, and it's almost like the fundamental one of the fundamental building blocks of a civic society is the ability to be heard. I mean, if you look at the flip side, look at an authoritarian regime. It's basically an authoritarian regime is people not listening to each other, and there's one guy talking, or one party talking.
There is one guy whose voice is the loudest, and they go, "Okay, I guess that's the one we'll listen to."
Yes, exactly. I don't know. I just thought of that. Although authoritarian regimes will never listen to that sort of stuff because, as you said, they're literally have you seen? I don't know if you've seen some of those like I guess could call it public announcements, but of leaders, sometimes they'll deliver a speech and it's literally everywhere because they put all the megaphones and the speakers, and it happens like North Korea and some other regimes, but it's like, man, boy, if you're in the manufacturing of speakers, I guess those are some good markets, unexpectedly.
Yeah, right? Wow, it's so convenient that no one disagrees with what you have to say.
One final question before we get to our little trivia there, because I know Maura is excited for the holidays, as she expressed before for the show. How excited she was, I'll leave that to the audience of how explosive or of how jubilant she is about the festivities coming up. But just to tie really everything that you've said so far, what is your hope for your platform? And I know that you're in school now and you're in the reserves, so there's still a lot of things that you want to accomplish. But what sort of things are you looking forward to bring your platform to the next level, or to maybe morph it into something new and something bigger than it is right now?
I cannot lie. I'm in a very different season this year than I was a year ago or even 2 years ago. This has been a very tumultuous time for myself, getting out of the active duty Army, going back to school. I'm working. I have a lot going on. And I'm still trying to figure out how to restructure my life around that. But I know for a fact that I want to continue advocating for policies that help soldiers and help soldiers' families and other service members, and encourage veterans not only to receive help, but actually allow for access to that help. My absolute dream is to be a civil rights attorney and to discuss the rights of citizens and to protect them. And that's a big motivation for why I don't think I said it while we were recording, but I have the GPA required and the LSAT scores needed for the law schools that I want to go to. And what keeps me focused is knowing that I have time to develop it. I'm in a season of rest, a season of planning. And in the next few years, hopefully I'm fingers crossed. I don't want to jinx anything, but I'm hoping to start an organization that would provide free grief support services to those who have unexpectedly lost a loved one, or under any circumstances, because I lost my sister Kitty when I was 15 years old, very unexpectedly.
I'm sorry to hear that.
And that's one aspect of my platform that I didn't get to talk about earlier, but I care about suicide prevention, not just because I care about veterans and because I care about mental health and because I have been in some rough patches in my life, but because I know what it feels like to grieve. And the reality is that my life is never going to be as bright and beautiful as it would have been if my sister were still here. And I think about her every single day. And if through my work, if through my advocacy, if through policy that I am writing and am trying to have passed either at the military level or on the civilian side, any sort of aid that allows at least one person to continue to try for one more day is a whole network of people who never have to experience grief. And that is my greatest motivation. I would not wish the experience of losing a loved one unexpectedly on a single person, on my worst enemy. And my only hope is that no matter what my work is in, whether it's continuing to be through specifically military suicide prevention, or if it's in my career as an attorney, or if it's just as little old Maura, I am very hopeful that I can make the world a little bit bigger and a little bit brighter for someone and help them.
So thank you so much for sharing about about your motivation and Kitty. Oh, that's such a beautiful name. And I just want to say that it's such a powerful moment, I think, when you share that, because I think we all are called to service, but not in the same way. I mean, just like when you were mentioning earlier about how not all veterans serve in the same capacity or the same position, I think you could say the same for anyone who wants to have visions to serve others. You never know exactly what that path is going to be, but you know why you're doing it. And I hope that all of the things that you're doing, and hope that everything you're going to do, because I know you're going to do great things. I hope that her legacy will be in there, and people remember that story, because I'm sure every single one of us is thinking about family, certainly around this time. The holidays are really a time for us to be together with family. All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, that'll wrap up our first part of episode 110. Be sure to look out for the trivia in part 2. The link is down in the show notes below. I really, really am so grateful to hear Maura's story and her motivation, and I hope you'll check out the links I'll provide down in the show notes below to learn more about her platform and to see what you can do maybe to contribute to veterans' causes. I'll see you in part 2 with our holiday trivia section next on Friends and Fellow Citizens.